Welcome back to the Tuum podcast. Before we begin today's episode, we'd like to acknowledge that we're recording this episode of the Tuum podcast on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of the Musqueam peoples. While you may be joining us from a place other than Musqueam land, we encourage you to learn about the land you're situated on, who the traditional owners are and the caretakers of those lands, and how you came to be on the land you're situated on. This is Zoe Wagner, and we have the privilege of talking to Stefan Labbé to explore their career and talk about his current role as a solutions journalist or a climate and environment journalist with Glacier Media. Welcome. So let's look back at your beginning at UBC. Can you walk us through your educational journey at UBC, please?
Sure. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I guess like any student, my career at UBC started in high school. I wasn't really planning on going to university for a long time, and I kind of applied on a whim, to be honest.
Okay.
Neither of my parents went to university, but I got in, and so I arrived kind of not sure about what direction I want to go in. I spent a year in humanities. Taking things like politics, English, Russian, all sorts of different classes, which I loved, but I wasn't sure. I went to sciences for a year. I finally landed on geography, which was kind of had a foot in each of those doors. And I would say, as it relates to my career, it wasn't until I went on an exchange to Mexico that I really started to consider the possibility of working as a reporter.
Okay.
It would take me a few more years to really understand how to start freelancing, and then in 2015 I came back and did a master's in journalism at the school.
Okay, wow. How long was your exchange for?
It was 1 year. I went to a school in central Mexico called La Universidad de las Américas in Puebla, which is just south of Mexico City.
Okay. Cool. Wow. I'm looking forward to going on exchange. I'm starting to do all the prep for that. So that's good to know about. That's exciting. So what were you most involved in during your time in your undergrad and then moving on to graduate school?
Besides the parties, as any undergraduate knows, I guess, I did, a decent amount of sports. I did some martial arts. I joined the varsity outdoor club, where I kind of started a lifelong obsession with rock climbing.
Oh, wow.
As I moved towards going on exchange and then returning, I did a lot of language meetups. So that would eventually land me in Mexico and South America. Extracurriculars, like I think anyone's life as an undergraduate, it's so great. You can just do anything you want.
Yeah, there's such a mix of everything. I'm glad you mentioned rock climbing. I'm a big rock climber as well. I do a lot of bouldering, and there's the aviary and the nest, which is all ropes climbing now. So that wasn't around when you were here, but that's something that we get to have now. So was there something you were specifically involved in that impacted your interest in journalism, especially after you came back from Mexico, I guess?
I think I'd probably have to start in Mexico. It's hard to think back sometimes, unless you look at like old emails.
Yeah.
But when I lived in Mexico, I lived with a photojournalist, and we spent a lot of time traveling throughout the southern parts of the country. It kind of opened up my eyes what journalism could do, and that it could be a viable career path. And like I said earlier, though, I came out of a university, like I think a lot of people, with a decent amount of student loans, and so it took me a few years to figure all that out and kind of get myself on a career path that would lead me to where I am today.
Okay, got it. This is a little bit of a pivot, but is there one or two clubs that you recommend an aspiring journalist gets involved in at UBC? I know we briefly talked about this before we started the podcast, but
I think, and this is, I'll be clear, like this is not something I didn't do. I don't like to live with regrets, but I certainly, the number one thing I would say for anyone wanting to be a reporter is just to join your school newspaper. Do it early, whether that's in high school, whether that's in your undergraduate career. It just gives you that real kind of real life experience. And it's like a little bit of less of a a high stakes introduction into the field. So I think journalism is something you have to do. And if you don't join a newspaper, you're not going to do it. Or if you don't join a media outlet. I'd also say learning another language or two or three is an excellent way to open doors. The more people you can talk to, the more reporting you can do. And for me, I think what helped me was just, whether it's classes or just your personal life, like just look for things that really spark interest in the world, because for me, curiosity is what keeps me going as a journalist. And if you don't have that, then you're not going to be looking for that next story or wanting to talk to that next person.
So the question is, how did UBC impact your ability to work in this industry?
Yeah, I think UBC helped me immensely. I mean, it was part of my life for many years. Yeah, I'll go back to being able to speak Spanish nearly fluently now. I attribute that to those early struggles with another language to UBC's exchange program. And yeah, certainly as a master's student, the journalism program helped me hone a lot of the skills I'd already started to develop. It helped me it was kind of like, I like to think of it as kind of like a lab where you get a moment to like pull back from industry and think clearly as a reporter, but also like what kind of reporter you want to be. You can experiment with different formats. And certainly with the staff, with the faculty they have on staff there, it opens up so many connections in the business. You get to meet editors at some very prestigious publications. And then it's really up to you what you do with that.
Okay, got it. So now we're going to pivot into breaking into the industry. I know you're in a unique industry and that you're sharing stories based on focused on environmental stories. So I'm curious, did you have connections to help you get started, especially coming out of the UBC master's program?
Before that, I definitely made my fair share of cold calls that didn't turn into anything. Some did. I lived in a few continents before I ended up doing my master's program, and I did do some freelancing there. Some of the earlier work I did was for a rock climbing publication that no longer exists, but had I mean, you might be able to kind of describe it as a glorified blog with a really good editor. But it was it kind of opened, it sparked interest for me, and I was teaching at the time at a university there, and I started doing this on the side, and it just kind of took over my life, and so that's when I decided to come back to North America, do the master's program. Yeah, from there, then I mean, we can talk about the master's program, but it's an intensive program. I mean, you start and you got to be ready to hit the ground running. You go through it. You get experience in all sorts of media outlets as you go through the program.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, like I said, it's really up to you to kind of go on from there. Not everyone does end up in journalism that goes through that program, but
oh wow, okay.
That was back in 2015. I graduated in 2017, so it's been a good. I've been freelancing for a good 8-9 years, and then since that program, it's been a good 6 years, I guess. Okay. 5 years. Yeah.
Wow, you mentioned that you were freelancing overseas or on different continents prior to the master's program. How did you get those roles? Was that cold calling basically? Because I know in our generation, I know a lot of us don't usually cold call places, so I think it's interesting.
Yeah, it was really just, I mean, there's some connections, a lot of cold calling. I did freelance after my master's program as well. I worked for a number of publications. So yeah, I ended up in Jordan. I was doing some reporting. I took assignments in the Caribbean as well after the Hurricane Maria there. I did plenty of reporting across Canada as well, on a whole range of different beat areas, I guess.
Okay.
But yeah, it's really about just not getting discouraged when you get turned down, and then continuously working to hone your pitches and convince editors that you're the right person to tell that story.
Do you find that you pitched out more, or you got pitches? You received pitches more?
Oh, at the beginning, you certainly are just pitching.
Got it.
Yeah, it's up to you to make those, make the case. But yeah, no, as you develop, I would develop relationships with editors, and as you prove yourself, you start getting assignments more, and
Okay.
they'll start trusting you with bigger budgets, travel budgets and things like that.
Okay. Wow. Looking back to the beginning of your career, if you would advise yourself on one or two things, what would it be? Is there anything you would particularly do different?
I'm not sure I would do. I mean, besides the newspaper bit, I never joined the school newspaper, so I would say do that again.
Yeah.
They're no joke. But I'd also tell myself probably that, get ready to fail. It's really a regular part of the job, especially at the beginning, and it's important that you'd fail, because that's how you learn. I mean, it's kind of a cliche, but it's true.
Yeah.
You have to do it to learn it.
Is there, so after traveling a lot and having the opportunity to be immersed in these different cultures, especially prior to coming to your master's program, right? Is there one experience or story that really impacted you that made you want to go back and get your master's?
I think, it's hard to really pin down one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be easier for me to talk about. Well, let me tell you about some stories that I've done, like as a result of my master's, I mean, even during my master's program. So, yeah, coming out of it, I definitely had some really interesting freelance assignments. But before that, I had a really great opportunity. Like I got an opportunity to work an Indigenous reporting program that would send people out to communities across British Columbia, especially around Metro Vancouver. But I'd say, one of the most memorable reporting trips I went on while I was there was to Colombia. I was part of a team of UBC master students at the journalism program that we basically went to 3 different countries: China, India, and Colombia. I went to Colombia, and we were reporting on from various cities on how urbanization was kind of radically changing life in these places, in all sorts of different ways. When we went to Cali, which is a city in Colombia's south, it was at the time when the Colombian government was trying to sign a peace agreement with the left-wing guerrilla group, the FARC. So we were looking to tell a story of some of these former fighters as they were reintegrated into kind of mainstream society. I made contact with a nun, actually, kind of an activist nun, who worked in the city, one of the most violent neighborhoods in the country, actually, and she had been working for years trying to demobilize gang members. Wow. Get them out of violence into something else in life. And so we got down there and we had this nun, and we started casting around for more people to talk to, and we eventually found a man who had run away from the guerrilla group and now helping kids avoid violent life, something similar to what the nun does, but with guerrillas. And we also met eventually made contact with a former demolitions expert from the FARC, who was kind of living in, not living in hiding, but living a low life, let's say. He had done a number of assassination attempts against him while he was living in the city there. And so, we talked to him. We were in this neighborhood all the time. And then on our last day, a lot of our reporting team had left. Me and one other reporter, Alex Villegas, who he now works for Reuters in Chile, actually. We finally got a call from a contact at a prison, and they said, "Oh, the commander's willing to see you now." And so we ended up jumping on in a car, crossing a bunch of military checkpoints up into the mountains, and then some of these guerrillas came and picked us up on some dirt bikes, and we drove up through this indigenous village, and and eventually on to this, what was, I think, described as a kind of a demobilization camp. And so a unit, a group of these soldiers had come to this camp to kind of transition from this kind of hit and run lifestyle, clandestine lifestyle to a normal life. But they were like just arriving, so we got a chance to see them. I mean, it was quite, the whole thing was a bit of a whirlwind. We ended up leaving after spending a bunch of time there. I mean, we met people, some who were like worried they'd be hunted down. Others said, you know, we're going to stand our ground if anything goes wrong with this peace agreement. And some just seemed like really tired of that life, you know. So we left the country just shortly after that, published a story in the Guardian, and then within a couple of months the violence started back up again. You know, people had warned us that, you know, once these guerrillas left the jungle, I mean, they have a lot of allegations that have proven true, that they've committed a lot of atrocities, like all sides in that war. But they also did provide some sort of protection to some communities, and so a lot of indigenous groups, land activists, I guess is one way you could describe them, started getting assassinated. So, you know, it was impactful being there, but it was also something that, you know, kind of sticks with you. Just, you know, you go into a story and sometimes you move on to the next story, but that people keep living that story. And yeah, it's not something you forget. One of many stories, I guess.
It sounded like a lot of what you do is just seizing the opportunity in the moment. Do you find that that's still true?
Yeah, I mean, certainly you're, as a reporter, you're always, time is precious, and you've got to kind of, when you see something, a story, or you have an opportunity to speak with someone, to go somewhere at a moment that is telling. Is telling. When I say telling, I mean it's an opportunity to kind of show the world what's happening, you know, as fast as we can make sense of it, and verify the facts on the ground. Yeah, you have to seize that, of course, but you also rely on people and them being willing to talk to you, and so you got to be careful with those stories as well, because they got a life to live after that. So like, I think there's certainly, I mean, like in any profession, there's some people that are more careful than others.
Okay, no, that's fair. So looking forward, I guess looking in the now, do you, this is more of a deep question, but what do you believe your purpose is as solutions journalists?
So solutions journalism is, it starts with the same proposition as an investigative reporter, or investigative journalism. So that's to, I guess, if you had to kind of sum it up, to root out and shed light on systemic problems that are facing our society, facing our world. But with solutions journalism, you take that starting point, here's our problem, here's what people or a situation is facing, and then you say, okay, let's take that one step further. Let's ask, who's doing it better somewhere else? What evidence do they have that their solution works? And then you can use that reporting and hold it up kind of against the situation that's you're facing in your local community, and say, hey, you know, you can hold that jurisdiction to account. You can say, what's stopping these officials from rolling out that solution here? I mean, look, it's working over here. Yes, there's barriers to maybe being replicated here, but we can learn something. So you can use it to hold as a positive story with evidence, not a piece of fluff. You have to have that evidence.
Yeah.
But you also can use it as a way to hold people to account.
Yeah. Well, so looking into the future, is there something that you specifically want to cover, or something that you're in the progress of trying to get to work on? I guess I don't know how to pose that particularly.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I'm a little bit exhausted right now, because I just came off a months-long investigation with the International Consortium for Investigative Journalists. I had an opportunity to work with them looking into a BC-based, ostensibly BC-based company that has quickly become the largest forestry company in North America. They've got operations across Canada, the US, Brazil, and France. Our investigation, which I carried out with some partners at CBC's National Investigative Team, paper in Nova Scotia called the Halifax Examiner, and then Le Monde and Radio France in France. We traced the links this company has to pulp and paper giant in China and Indonesia. They're kind of sprawling company, huge conglomerate. And they've been accused by some groups for massive deforestation and conflict with communities there. So yeah, we went through this. Since our stories were published, some people and some members in Ottawa Standing Committee on Natural Resources have committed to investigating it. So to look forward, I'm a little bit exhausted, but I have to say that long term, I'd like to do more of that reporting, coming together with 140 journalists, 139 journalists from, I think we were 40 media outlets in 27 countries to report on deforestation. It was, it has a lot of impact when that many good reporters are coming together to really spend time on all sorts of stories and then release that all at once. The impact has been, you can see it across, all these different countries. I'll just add, like, long term, I'm a reporter first, and I could be pulled to any other beat. I'm aware that I could be pulled to any other beat at any moment, and I don't really have a problem with that. I think that's what makes this job so interesting. Okay. Every day's different.
Yeah. So coming back, is there anyone you particularly want to work with? Because you said that you've done some of the stories you shared, you've been working with other journalists. Is there anyone you would like to work with in the future, or it just kind of depends on who you meet at a certain time?
Yeah, I don't have a short list of. I mean, I have a short list of. I have a long list of reporters that I respect immensely, and that I admire. But there's a lot of people like that I haven't met, and then I'm sure if I were to get a chance to work with, I'd be thrilled. Working again with the ICIJ would be. I would do that in a heartbeat. They're just very high caliber reporters. I'd like to collaborate on more projects like that. People not so much. I mean, I do, as a reporter covering climate right now, there are some places and stories that I think I would like to kind of get to and make sense of for myself, if not for readers. There's been reporting here, but I think reporting on our planet's poles is such a telling place to tell us the story of climate, especially as it's heating up so much faster. So, reporting in the Arctic and the Antarctic and the adjacent kind of regions that those huge climate changes are impacting, like those border regions. We say the Arctic now, but that's only creeping south. So getting to those places is something that I've thought about.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, you hear a lot of stories about people in all these different places, or these journalists going these different places, and unless you like talk to someone, you don't really know what that's like. Absolutely. So yeah. So lastly, there's so many things happening in the world, from the revolution in Iran to the war in Ukraine to the controversy over the FIFA World Cup in Qatar at the time. Is there a responsibility you believe journalists have in the current global landscape on what to share and what to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, journalists have always had a responsibility to their readers, to their audiences, whether that's reflecting people's stories in their community, documenting ugly corners of the world, like you said, whether that's war, famine, something else, or rooting out corruption and holding powerful people and institutions to account. I don't think that has changed. If anything, as our world becomes more complicated and we face problems that are truly global in nature, like climate change, that job just becomes more important.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to speak with you, and I think this has given me a lot more energy. I know, I'm stealing a little bit of your energy here, but it's exciting as a student to hear what's out there, because I think we hear a lot about, cuts in the journalism industry, and it's sometimes hard to tune that out. So it's kind of reassuring, and it's nice to hear from someone in the industry.
Well, I have to say, as a reporter, we draw energies from stories. We draw energy from stories we do, but we also it's important to lean on other reporters, and so I do the same thing with colleagues, and we're always happy to. It's a cutthroat industry in some ways, but on the other hand, I have some reporters I know have been some of the most helpful people I've ever met, and yeah, so we're always here to help people as they want to break into the industry.
It's a broader community. So if anyone wants to follow you or follow your journey, is there any social media accounts or anything you recommend that people look into? And I will put these in the show notes as well.
Yes, you can follow me on Twitter. I know it's a toxic kind of platform for some people, but it's still kind of the best thing out there, I guess, for some reporters. So yeah, you can follow me at Stefan Labbé, STEFANLABBE, and just look out for my byline.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day and home.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on your podcast. It's a pleasure.